Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. My name is Jessica Melman, and I am the Chief Planning Officer at Jewish Federation of Greater MetroWest, New Jersey. It is my pleasure to be joining you today, where we're going to be focusing on the work of Federation and the Foundation in Israel and around the world. Our speakers today are Michal Tzur, Director of Global Connections for the Jewish Federation of Greater MetroWest in New Jersey, in Israel, sorry. Danielle Moore, Vice President of Israel and Global Philanthropy for the Jewish Agency for Israel. Alex Sklar, Director of Strategic Partnerships and Campaign Director for the JDC. Odelia Carucci, Director of the MacNess Fund of the Jewish Community Foundation. And Kim Hirsch, the Executive Director of the Jewish Community Foundation of Greater MetroWest, New Jersey. Global Connections, Beverly, you can put the next slide. Thank you. Global Connections is the Israel and Overseas Department of Jewish Federation of Greater MetroWest. Through strategic organizational partnerships, your gift to Jewish Federation touches the lives of Jewish people living in communities in over 70 countries around the world. And I apologize, I couldn't get 70 stars on my map, but you get the idea. Our main partners in these global efforts, and we call them our core partners, are the Jewish Agency for Israel and the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. World ORT is also a core partner, though they are not joining us today. It is through these organizations that so much of the life-saving and community-building work happens around the world. Greater MetroWest is unique among federations because of the intensive direct programmatic work we do on the ground in Israel and in Eastern Europe. Some of the work is done in collaboration with our core partners, and some is through relationships that we have cultivated with organizations and communities adjacent to core. As we have strengthened our programmatic work over the years, we are developing what we call our Greater MetroWest Partnership Network. So instead of thinking about individual programs in each partner community, we're working to fund programs that link individuals in these communities together, developing a sense of Jewish peoplehood. And of course, a conversation about Federation's work overseas would not be complete without noting the important work of the MacNess Fund. This provides grants to support economic development in Israel's Negev region. The Ness Fund, which sits at JCF, has its own grant-making committee, but Global Connections allocations and the MacNess Fund work in tandem to make significant impact in the Negev. Each of our speakers today will talk more in depth about the different aspects of these organizations and programs. Before I introduce our first speaker, I want to briefly delve into the annual campaign overseas allocations numbers so you have a sense of the scope of our funding in this space. This year, 30% of our program and agency allocations went to Israel and overseas. And it's very important to note that this number is usually closer to about 45% overseas, but we shifted dollars locally this year because of COVID-19. It was a one-year shift of dollars. Within that 37, or usually 45%, 64% of our dollars go to our core partners, JDC, Jaffe, and ORT, and 35% go to direct program allocations, which we also call electives. So I will be able to answer questions around our allocations later in the program. I want to remind everybody that all questions should be placed in the Q&A function of Zoom. And without further ado, I want to introduce Michal Tzur, our Director of Global Connections in Israel. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's evening here, so Erev Tov. I'm very happy to take part in this webinar. It's one of the first and only times that the situation and the reality hits globally, all around the world. It's not just one side need to help the other side, but we're all in the same situation. And I wanted to share with you today some of the realities that we're dealing with here in Israel. So my first comment, I think, will be that the overall feeling here in Israel, now that we're in the second phase of the pandemic, is that it's not just about the virus or the health issues that are connected to it, but it's more about the ripple effects the economy that has taken a huge hit. We're talking about entering a stage of deep recession that will take somewhere between 6 to 18 months just to get back to normality. We're talking about periphery and weaker population that took a great hit and are the damage in terms of socioeconomic gaps and violence and domestic violence and losing jobs and not being able to provide to their families is huge. While the unemployment rate in Israel is about 20% now, in this area, in the periphery, in ultra-Orthodox communities, in the Arab communities, we're talking about much higher rates. I will also say that the second wave of the pandemic here caused a situation where people just lost trust in the government, in the instructions we're getting. We see riots all the time on a daily basis in Jerusalem, on a weekly basis in all the bridges on the highways. You can see here my son demonstrating and the elderly of the kibbutz I live in demonstrating. It crosses population and age groups. It also creates a lot of tension between right and left but I have to say that the anger and the tension are not necessarily has to do with political ideology, just a sense of frustration. At the same time, we also see that the border with Gaza is getting more tense. There's a picture here of a fire that was taken just outside of my house. I live in Kibbutz Erez, which is by the border with Gaza and is a partner community of MetroWest. We get the red color alerts pretty often. The fires have gotten to a situation of 60 fires a day in the area. They're caused by terror balloons coming from the Gaza Strip. In most cases, they're not even being reported because just too much. But it's here, and we smell it and we see it, and it adds to the already existing stress. I think we can move to the next slide. Thanks. I will say that the way the community MetroWest reacted to the situation, to the pandemic situation in Israel was very inspiring. The first phase, the immediate reaction was trying to answer pressing immediate needs. In terms of food distribution, we gave food packages in Rishon LeZion, in Ofakim, in Merchavim, to families who could not, right before Pesach, to families who could not celebrate the holidays without these packages. We also started a program for the elderly. We see it also again on a global scope, that the elderly in all communities in Israel and abroad are isolated, are sitting at home. So we joined a company called Uniper, which installs a device that broadcasts programs and creates connections for the elderly with their social workers, with their families, among themselves. And the good news and the most exciting news is that it's going to be installed in Ofakim, Merchavim, Arad, and New Jersey. In New Jersey, it's already being installed, and that's a beautiful collaboration and cooperation that we were able to take part in. The second reaction that we had was trying to keep and maintain engagement and living bridge connections. We understand that we're all in the same situation as I said before, and we wanted to keep the connections alive. So for that, we held a big Kabbalat Shabbat, few of them, but one of them was like a big hit with people, with over 250 participants from New Jersey, from Israel, and from our partner community in Cherkasy. It was global, it was, but still it had a family feeling. People knew each other and people were very happy to see each other and welcome the Shabbat together in the same language and in the same tunes and songs. It was beautiful. We took part in a operation of sending kids to summer camp kids who could not go this year. So we collected 400 letters from kids in our partner communities in Israel to be sent to New Jersey. You can see Ligal from our team holding the envelopes and the kids in the schools writing them. It felt very good to be part of this connection. We had our peoplehood. It's a leadership program for adults that we're running for the past 10 years. The Israelis printed masks with the peoplehood logo and sent to their American friends. And these are just, samples of the things we did. We also had the Rishonim, our beloved Rishonim, who had to finish their year earlier and come back to Israel. And they came to us and said, we need to do something. We still need to volunteer. We want to keep the connections. And we opened for them a house in Merchavim, in one of the partnerships. And they have been working with over 600 kids in the schools and helping with community mapping projects, walking from one house to the other and just helping people getting the information they need and getting the information back to the municipalities so they can map the community and see who needs what in light of the situation. There's a lot more going on, and I'm happy to answer on a private channel if you have any questions or ideas or anything that you wanted to know. I will just end it with the biggest lesson that we learned from this from this past 6 months is that we truly live in MetroWest, Kol Israel Aravim Ze Baze. We found the ways, very creative ways to keep the connections alive, to care for one another, and I'm a proud member of this effort. Toda.
Thank you, Michal. It is now my pleasure to call on Alexandra Shklar, the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Campaign Director for JDC. Alex, are you there? Alex, we can't hear you. Okay.
It's working on. Jessica?
Alex, we're getting some feedback from you. I am going to jump in here. Alex, while you work on your volume and your voice, I'm going to call on Danielle Moore. Danielle is the Vice President for Israel and Global Philanthropy for the Jewish Agency for Israel. We're just going to switch those two around. So Beverly, can you forward to the Jewish Agency slides?
Oh, okay. Shalom, would you like me to start?
Yes, please. Go ahead, Danielle.
Okay. Hi, so it's a pleasure being here with you. Good evening to you all. I'm speaking to you actually, of course, from Israel, but from Kibbutz Dgania. It's here in the north of Israel, right by the Galilee, right by the Kinneret. If you see anyone walking around, it's because my family is doing a cookout outside, and I'm here happy to talk to you. So on any given day, the Jewish Agency works to connect and to bring the global Jewish people together with one another and with Israel by changing the lives of over 2 million of our people in over 70 countries around the world. So when this pandemic hit, it meant that nearly every single aspect of our work in over 20 time zones had to adapt dramatically and quickly. And you know, we all have the famous saying that man plans and God laughs. You know, over the last year, the Jewish Agency has been deeply involved in a strategic planning process. And we asked ourselves how, as a 90-year-old organization, we can become more agile. Well, this pandemic didn't ask us, and it actually demanded that we become more agile. And I'm proud to say that we rose, and we still are rising to this challenge. So whereas in times of routine, the bulk of our work really seeks to build the Jewish future through changing of lives, at this time, a significant portion of our work became securing the Jewish present of communities hit hard by the pandemic, whether in Israel, whether around the world, especially Italy, Spain, of course, Ethiopia. So there could be a Jewish future, and that we could actually be more and more engaged also at this time in protecting and saving lives. And I'd like to say, and to make this very clear, that we are able to do this thanks to you. And far beyond thanks to you as donors, we're able to make it thanks to you as our partners, because what's unique about the relationship between the Jewish Agency and the community of Greater MetroWest is that much of your connection projects are run together with us, whether it's Shlichim, whether it's partnership with Israel, whether it's the Rishonim that you sadly had to send back home to Israel earlier this year. The Jewish Agency is there to provide you with those services. And I can also share with you that when we speak about the scope of our activity being the largest Jewish nonprofit in the world, since this crisis began, we have implemented over $16 million in funds to meet the needs of people in Israel and Jewish people all around the world. And most of those funds actually went to Jewish communities and Jews in need around the world. I'll start with the slide that is right now on the screen. And when we talk about the areas of our work in these recent months, we can divide them into a few categories. The first category is really people that due to the pandemic, we had to provide holistic care for 24/7. And I won't go into all of the communities, but I will discuss a couple. So first of all, we're talking about Holocaust survivors and poor elderly that live in 57 homes the Jewish Agency operates in Israel, 7,000 people, who really are the poorest in Israel as far as elderly, but they're also the most fortunate in some ways because they got off the waiting list and into the Amigul homes. In a typical time, what Amigul does chiefly is give them a good quality of life and help them connect with outer society so they can spend these last years of their lives in dignity. But what we had to do actually at this time was completely different. We had to help them stay alive and healthy. And thank God, and thanks to a lot of efforts and funds that were put in, of the 7,000 survivors and poor elderly, we have lost 2 to Corona. And this is horrible, but at the same time, it's remarkable because when you look at any other senior center in Israel, Amigul really stands out as the safest. We also at the same time had to save them from the worst of human diseases, which is of course loneliness. We did this very creatively with balcony concerts, with bringing family members to visit them using crane lifts. We have a video to show that. If you want, we can share it after the call. And we provided literally tons and tons of food and hygiene supplies. At any given month, we spent about $150,000 on just these basic needs of hygiene. Another group that we supported very intensively is children at risk, those that live in our youth villages and those families in the Youth Futures program, which Greater MetroWest is a very strong supporter of, that were in their homes, in quarantine, and in situations where the home is never really the safest environment for them because they are defined as children at risk. And we had to find ways during the quarantine and also now to be able to reach them and give them a good, safe life. Domestic violence became a strong threat more than ever it has before. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The second area of our work is really probably the most traditional one that you can think of when it comes to the Jewish Agency, and that is Aliyah. You know, there are many moments that we as Jews ask ourselves hard questions. There are other moments when we can feel very proud of ourselves and of our Jewish community. I'd like to suggest to you that Aliyah at this time is one of these proud moments. Israel is simply the only country around the world that is taking in immigrants at this time. My colleagues in the Aliyah unit are working day and night. Since the pandemic started, they have treated over 90,000 cases of requests, asking for information, wanting to open Aliyah files, trying to find a way to get to Israel from all over the world. And despite the closure of borders and cancellation of thousands of flights, we have succeeded in bringing to Israel since March over 5,000 olim from some 30 countries around the world. Just this week, some 400 olim arrived in Israel. Each one of them becomes almost a rescue case because you have to find
Let's give her a second to see if she can reconnect. Danielle, are you there? Let's give her one more moment. Definitely suffering from some internet issues today. Okay. So I think what we'll do, Alex, are you there? Can you bring yourself up and we'll see if you're working today? Can you hear us?
Yes,
Can you speak?
I'm
Okay.
Here. Apologies for the poor internet connection.
We seem to be having a lot of that today. So Beverly is going to go back to yours. When Danielle joins us again, we'll have her finish up. We can also have her finish up her remarks as part of the question and answer session. So Alex from the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee.
Thank you, Jessica, and thanks to the Foundation for inviting us to join today. So before we jump in, just to echo what Michal said earlier about this being a global crisis, we recognize that things are difficult locally as well, physically, emotionally, personally, community-wide, and I just want to acknowledge that fact. And given all of that, I want to extend special thanks to all of you for taking the time to do the session today and to learn more about the needs of those overseas. I hope you know how much we appreciate the partnership with the Greater MetroWest Federation and are so proud to be able to do this work on your behalf. So in a nutshell, JDC, which is also known as the Joint, is the largest Jewish humanitarian organization in the world. JDC has been around since 1914, playing a key role in every major Jewish event. From providing aid to Jews in Palestine, to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, to the DP camps after World War II, to developing social services in Israel, and to the Argentina crisis, and many, many more. Today, JDC is serving as the global 911 of the Jewish people, providing essential aid to Jews in need in more than 70 countries. Our mission continues to be the same. We rescue Jews in danger, we provide relief to Jews in need, and we renew and rebuild Jewish communities that were dormant for decades. While we won't be able to travel to all 70 countries today, I would like to take you on the journey to just some of them, especially those that keep us up at night and those that were affected the most by the current COVID crisis. So the first stop is the former Soviet Union. As you can hear from my accent, that is my home country. Just so you understand the scope of the FSU region, we're talking about 11 different countries and 11 different time zones. Believe it or not, today in 2020, what we're facing in this region is the largest Jewish humanitarian relief effort since World War II. I'll say it again, it's the largest Jewish humanitarian relief effort since World War II. There are hundreds of thousands of Jews in the region who live in unimaginable poverty. We're talking about people who lived through years of Nazism, who lived through decades of communism, to only find themselves living today on pensions of $68 a month. And if you do the math, $68 a month is about $2 a day. These people are forced to choose between food and medicine. They live in dilapidated conditions, sometimes communal apartment, and sometimes other structures without proper electricity or plumbing. In addition, there's no social or medical safety net in these countries. For example, in Ukraine, if you are after the age of 70, an ambulance will simply not pick you up. You may ask why? Because that's supposed to be your life expectancy. And if you do make it to the hospital, there is a list of supplies that you have to bring. Beverly, if you don't mind pulling up that slide. I know it's in Russian, but it says that you need to bring your own soap, your own air freshener, your own toilet paper, your own syringes, bed sheets, and other supplies. The most recent story I heard from a colleague is when one of our clients had to go to the hospital, they had to bring their own bag of blood. JDC is providing a lifeline to over 83,000 Jewish elderly, day in and day out in this region, many of whom are Holocaust survivors and impoverished children. The services we provide include food, medicine, home care, winter relief, and SOS emergency funds for special medical procedures and emergencies. I know that some of you had the chance to travel to this region, especially to the Cherkasy, Ukraine, the Greater MetroWest partnership, and I hope that when travel resumes, we will be able to do this again. Now, imagine being hit by Corona in a place that I just described. The fact that we have the presence and do this work day in, are you able to pull those up? Thank you. Yes, thank you. Within the first few days of COVID crisis, we shifted all of our operations on the ground into a virtual mode and trained everybody on safety protocols and focused on ensuring that services continue uninterrupted. For many of our clients, especially those who are bedridden and homebound, virtual aid is not an option. We had to pivot quickly, find a safe way for the home care worker to reach the client without endangering either of them. We incurred major expenses as we needed to purchase protective gear for home care workers and the clients. In addition, we had to find solutions to transportation issues, as some had spotty transportation, and in other cases, it would be too dangerous for the home care worker to take public transportation and thereby endanger themselves and the client. Some of these creative solutions included bikes or taxis or other private methods of transportation to overcome that. On top of all of that, due to the political and economic instability of this region, the cost of food and medications skyrocketed by more than 50%. We mobilized the network of 5,000 volunteers and a call center who are calling and checking on our clients on a regular basis. Just a quick anecdote, if you can go to the next slide, please. In Moldova, we had 12 volunteers calling 1,000 clients within 48 hours, okay? 1,000 clients in 48 hours. The good news is that these efforts paid off, or at least for now. The numbers of COVID cases and deaths amongst our clients was very low. Another thing that paid off is the years of investment we made in the local youth and young leadership. Had this crisis happened 20 years ago, we would not have the local foundation to rely on. The JDC youth movement, called the Active Jewish Teens, which is in fact the fastest growing youth movement in the world, has been incredibly inspiring. Stepping in and stepping up to help with the distribution of services, from delivering food to online programming, they organized over 125 online Passover Seders, Shabbat services, cooking classes, and I can go on and on. Everything they can do to give back, everything they can do to implement the Jewish values that they learned through these programs. What's inspiring the most about this, that not only they give back, they're also encouraging their parents to do the same. So it's a true miracle to see this Jewish revival in a region where it was not possible for decades. Moving quickly from FSU to Europe, JDC has a very long history with communities in Europe. In recent years, we have been working with those communities on leadership and resilience development in light of recent, terror attacks and anti-Semitism. But since the beginning of this crisis, these communities are turning to us with new needs, this time with humanitarian needs. The local institutions are crumbling, and there is a wave of the new poor, people who didn't require welfare assistance before, and now they do. We launched a special emergency fund with the local community of about $3.5 million, providing cash assistance in 17 different cities that are listed here. The idea is to do this quickly, is to front load, is to give them the money now before this becomes a long-term crisis. Now, we're of course watching the situation closely as there is a new wave of COVID emerging in this region. Moving from Europe, this is a very fast flight, as you can tell. Moving from Europe to Latin America, we of course paying a very close attention on the situation there, which now seems to be a hotspot for Corona, especially in places like Argentina, Venezuela, Chile, and Cuba. I think this one picture really says it all in terms of the inflation. That's how much currency you need to buy one chicken, if you can even get a hold of one. While our work in Venezuela has to remain quiet, I can't share too much, but I will tell you that the 4,800 Jews who are left in Venezuela are being cared for and provided with humanitarian aid. Just so you understand what they're dealing with, 2/3 of the population lost 25 pounds this past year. The average salary is about $7 a month, and the cost of an apple or a box of cereal is about $3. In Argentina, the situation is concerning too. In Argentina, they've been facing an economic instability for the past few years, and obviously a crisis like this made things only worse. Half of the Latin American population lives in Argentina. It's 200,000 Jews. I know a few people from MetroWest traveled there this past year. Again, this community is now struggling. 20% of the community lives in the provinces or the periphery, and they are too turning to us for humanitarian assistance. The last one is Cuba. The last mission to Cuba from the United States took place this past February, and that was the MetroWest Federation's mission. Kim and I were there together, and since then there were no missions to Cuba. Just, you know, when we talk about virtual realities and virtual solutions, when you're talking about a country like Cuba that doesn't even have access to internet, none of that is an option. So our last stop today is Israel, our beloved Israel. Israel remains to be top priority for JDC. In fact, a third of JDC's budget is in Israel. JDC serves as the R&D of the Israeli government. The government turns to us to solve some of its most pressing social challenges as related to vulnerable populations. We're talking about people with disabilities, we're talking about the elderly, we're talking about the children at risk, and the unemployed populations. We have an amazing partnership with the Israeli government, where for every philanthropic dollar that we bring to the table, they match it with $3 more, which allows us to have large-scale impact on the entire system and not just the individual. Here again, at times of crisis, the vulnerable are hit the hardest, and the issues they're facing became so much bigger as a result of the crisis. We're now talking about more than 1 million people that's facing unemployment. Again, the government turned to us to assist with both the immediate needs and the planning for the day after, the long-term effects of the crisis. Here are some examples of what was done on the short-term level as far as the immediate response. We launched a nationwide effort to meet the urgent needs of 40,000 vulnerable seniors, providing essential services, medical, hygiene, laundry services, and telephone counseling. We had to train hundreds of professionals and caregivers to be able to give services remotely. I just watched a video yesterday of a physical therapist that conducted a physical therapy class for an elderly person in Israel using pickle cans to make sure that they continue to be active and not alone. We also work, as I said, system-wide with the government, with 140 poor municipalities that needed help at this time to implement some of the services, to make sure not only that the services are available for their community, but they're done strategically, effectively, efficiently, but also that the data is being digitized, that things are being recorded, that there is enough data for them to be able to make prudent decisions as they move forward dealing with this long-term reality.
Alex,
Finally,
Alex.
yes, has to stop.
We need to end.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
You'll
very
stick
much.
around for questions and answers.
Yes.
Danielle, are you still there? I wanted to give you the opportunity to finish your presentation. You are back with us. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, so I'm back, and I hope that the internet connection here at Kibbutz Dgania will be more stable. So picking up also from where Alex was discussing, the work that JDC does globally around the world is amazing. And when we look at the work that we do around the world, it focuses primarily on educational opportunities, connection with Israel, strengthening Jewish identity. So how do you do that when the former Soviet Union, for example, that our main thrust of activity is to provide summer camps? How do you do that when you provide some 2,000 young Israelis to travel to the United States and serve in your summer camps to be the Israel inspiration for your children? Well, in the FSU, we did this, we pivoted completely, and we did virtual summer camps serving some 3,000 Jewish children and teenagers. We're continuing with this currently and going into also partially frontal, partially still virtual. And when you think about this, it's not just about keeping the kids busy during summer vacation. It's about the fact that for about 70% of these children, this Jewish agency summer camp is the only Jewish experience that they have in the entire year. And so how could we possibly allow them to miss that? Next slide, please. And to pick up again from where Alex was talking about work that JDC does around the world. You know, in the US, the Jewish communities that were hit hard by Corona, they had in some cases the ability to rely on federal funds or other government sources that came to them. And countries around the world like Venezuela or even Italy and Spain, that was simply not available. The Italian Jewish community went from being a proud 2,000-year-old Jewish community that supports Israel campaigns to a community in need within just about 2 months. And if we're thinking about Venezuela, you know that the place where JDC stores their food and their medicine, the generator there, the water container were provided by the Jewish agency. And at this time, they were among the recipients, the 23 Jewish communities around the world that were recipients of grants and loans from the Jewish agency, Corona Emergency Fund. We also must remember Ethiopia at this time, where we're talking about some 7,000 Jews that are living in conditions, you know, the size of their home is probably the size of a typical American bathroom, only they don't have running water or electricity. So dealing there with how do you provide hygiene in situations like that? How do you provide food to children, to nursing mothers? And this is something that we've been engaged with since the beginning of the pandemic, and we still are. And, you know, being in Israel, I really have the privilege of meeting face to face with a lot of the people that we get to help, also thanks to you. So I'd like to introduce just a couple to you. And because we're really talking here about the Jewish present and the Jewish future, they're going to be children. So the first person I'd like to introduce to you is here, Avi. Avi is just 10 years old, and he lives in the South. And he comes from a family that, regardless of Corona, really went through such harsh times. He participates in the Jewish Agency Youth Futures program, also funded by MetroWest, where he has a mentor that helps guide his family and him on a better path in life. His family fell into the horrible statistic of domestic violence. The mother did not know what to do. Her husband became a worse alcoholist than he ever was before. And through the mentor that the Jewish Agency provides in Youth Futures, they were able to get an eviction order against a restraining order against the husband, to get financial assistance for the family, and to help them on some sort of path with all the complexities of their life, on a path towards a better future. There are about 4,000 families in Youth Futures that we care for in this way, and we see that whereas in the past, the bulk of our work with them had to do with educational opportunities, believing in themselves, improving their economic reality, now we see that a lot of the problems actually have to do with this very sad reality of domestic violence. Next slide, please. There was one slide that you missed, so I'll tell you the story regardless. I want to tell you the story of Maxim. Maxim is just a 7-year-old boy from St. Petersburg, Russia. Yes, thank you. That's Maxim. Maxim and his family, as they're getting on into the airport in St. Petersburg, Russia, on their way home to Israel. It was discovered about 1.5 years ago that Maxim has leukemia. He started receiving treatments in Moscow. His parents did everything for him. They say, that they started their quarantine period a long time ago because having a kid with cancer meant that they didn't want to take any risks and let any relatives or friends into the house. And what happened just a few months ago is that they realized that his cancer has become untreatable in St. Petersburg, and they tried it looking for a way out. They did not know where to go, and they were told that perhaps, Maxim's father is Jewish, so maybe you should try and make Aliyah. He thought that's not possible. How would anyone make Aliyah at this time of a corona pandemic with a sick child? What country would want that? Well, little did he know, and within a week, literally a week from when he wrote the first email to the Jewish Agency office in St. Petersburg, Maxim and his family were already settled in an apartment by the En Karem Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem. When they landed at the airport, they received all kinds of documents, and the father asked, when will our health insurance get into effect? Because of course he needs to know, when can his son receive cancer treatments? And they were told, like all Olim, its effect immediately. Maxim is about to go through a bone marrow transplant in just about 2 weeks. So when I talk about life-saving activities also that relate to Aliyah, Maxim is just one of these sad examples, but hopeful examples. The next slide, please. And I'd like to end then, the term that I've heard more and more being used recently, thinking about how can we deal with the impact of COVID on our lives, is that we should not just be sufficient with kindness and empathy, but that we need to go into radical empathy. And looking here just at this picture of 9-year-old Anna from Moscow, a little girl whose entire world is turned over, her family making Aliyah at this time, her older sister, similar to Maxim, is sick too. And when her parents tell her, Anna, you only have 3 toys to pack, what are you going to take with you? Because in the quarantine hotel, we can't have a lot of things with us. She says, I have to take my teddy bears, Big Bear and Little Bear, because I just can't sleep without them. Her parents say, why don't you take a puzzle or a board game or something that you can spend more time with? It will be difficult to be 14 days in a quarantine small hotel room. But she insisted. She arrived with her teddy bears in Israel. You can see how also she lovingly buckled them into her seat in the plane. And she didn't know that when she would arrive in Israel and arrive at the quarantine hotel, my colleague Dima, who is responsible for many of the Olim that arrive in the quarantine hotels, knocked on the hotel and brought them board games and coloring books and different activities for Anna and for her older sister to help pass the time. That's just a little tiny example of radical empathy. And I'd like to thank you for enabling us to do that. And thank you for being together with us as we all have to struggle through this time, knowing that and praying and hoping that our future will eventually be a better one, thanks to all the work that weren't possible to do today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you for those wonderful stories. It is now my pleasure to call on Odilia Carucci, who is the director of the MacNess Fund of the Jewish Community Foundation.
Thank you, Jessica. Hello, everyone. Good evening from Israel. So for me, it's a pleasure to be with you here today. Thank you, Danielle, for the inspiration. It was truly amazing to see what you have done. Just to make sure that everyone know who this person was, MacNess. He was a farmer, came to the Federation at 2005, asked to give his money to the state of Israel. He wasn't familiar with the Negev first, but after a long negotiation with Stanley Stone and the people at the Federation, they decide to give the money, his will, to dedicate his will to the Negev region. The MacNess Fund is supporting economic and demographic development in the Negev for the last 15 years with more than $7 million over the years. We're granting grants up to 1,000 dollars for each grant. We work with different associations and different organizations around the Negev that's concerning economic and demographic development in the Negev. So when the pandemic just started, we had a board meeting and all the members of the council of NES thought about how can we help? What can we do? We know that our regular cycle is only in October, but we have to do something right now, because I have to say that all of our board members are really connected to the Negev, and they keep in touch with the Negev civilians all over the year. If there's a rackets in Sderot, they truly always send in emails and call our grantors and asking about them and how they're struggling with the situation. So for them, it was for the Council of NES, for the board members of NES, it was truly important to do something. So we published at about the beginning of April, really the beginning of the pandemic here in Israel, 2 weeks after the pandemic, after Purim, after the pandemic here in Israel began. We published an RFP, and as you can see, we got 164 applications, even though we asked them to be in English. So it's a huge number, and we had 1 week to go over all of them, and eventually we chose only 13 grants, only 13 organizations to get the grant from us. And what happened is that it was at the beginning of the pandemic, and a lot of you can see in green, different applications that we got and we actually negotiate, and you can see in red what we didn't want to support. Eventually, it was the beginning of the pandemic, and we had no alcohol gel. A lot of people had no masks, and so you can see a lot of the organizations that turned to us, that applied to us, they asked for things that are disposable. So we thought how we can choose from 164 applications, and eventually we decided to stay loyal to the NES mission, which is economic and demographic development. And we thought about investing the money in initiative that will last at the day after the corona. Hopefully it will be tomorrow morning. So the first, I'm going to give you a few examples, not all the 13, but one of them was to Yerucham Tourism Association. They just established this association a few months ago, and they decided to host a hackathon about the tourism in Israel the day after the COVID. So for people who know Yerucham, to say even to the civilian in Israel, tourism in Yerucham, so they will say, what? Tourism in Yerucham? What are you talking about? We are talking about a very neglected place in Israel, the southern Israel, just 10,000 civilians. But they managed to create a tourism association. They managed to create a lot of beautiful places for tourism. And they will be the first in Israel to host a hackathon that will solve the problems of the tourism during the pandemic. And one of the things that they already done, we had a range of meteors in Israel, the southern Israel lately, and they took part of the money to host festivals, because people all over Israel was looking for something to do with the children during the summer vacation, but it has to be outside. So they said, why not to join Mitzpe Ramon and other people, other settlements in the Negev, and to host festivals of meteors in Yerucham. I can tell you that everything was sold out. A lot of people came to Yerucham with the mask. They were with their families, and each and every one of the families got her own tour guides, and they actually had a lot of fun, and everything was sold out thanks to the NES Fund money. This is one of the programs, and they will host in September the big hackathon about different ideas of how to make tourism even that we have the pandemic. Mindset, it's another organization in Israel. It deals mainly with trying to connect the education system in Israel, but not only the education system, but the teachers particularly to the 21st century. It teaches teachers from the Bedouin community, but not only, but also from the Jewish community, mainly in the south, but all over Israel, how to reconnect to the 21st century. And we know that the pandemic insists people to know how to work with computers. And I can tell you that a lot of my children's teachers didn't know how to use Zoom, and the pandemic insists them to know how to work with a computer, and you can see that they're still struggling. So during routine time, they teach the teacher how to create new experience in the classroom using tablets, using laptops, using computers, using TV movies, not to keep using the traditional ways of teaching. And what they ask for NES right now is to give them the grant to take mostly the Bedouin teachers around the villages in the south, and teach them how to work with the computer, how to use Zoom, and how to create classroom online. Negev Market. Negev Market is another initiative that asks for our support. It's one of the initiatives that's try to take the small and medium businesses all around the Negev, mostly agricultures, people who do things with art and crafts, people with small restaurants, catering, and they try to gather all this market, mostly at the Western Negev market, where in Gaza envelope, which already had been affected all over the last 10 years. And now with the COVID, it's even worse. So they try to gather them, and they create for them with our grant website platform where they can have an information about different companies who would like to use their services. For example, if a high-tech company would like to buy a Rosh Hashanah gift for her workers, they have all this digital platform where they can choose from this platform to buy the gift to the workers from the Western Negev businesses. And what you can see here in the picture, just go back, Beverly, please. What you can see here in the picture, it's a slide of actually a commercial to buy a gift card. A gift card, you can buy different gift cards from all over the Negev to your employees. Actually, you can go, Beverly, go ahead. Another initiative was Be'er Sheva Online Mall. The municipality of Be'er Sheva applied for us to fund an online mall. They actually create a platform for all the small and medium businesses all around Be'er Sheva, in addition to give them first the opportunity to be online. A lot of the businesses around the Negev was not online until the pandemic because they didn't think that they should use it. People used to come to the old city of Be'er Sheva or different places and get into the store, like, all times, and buy whatever it is that they would like to buy. But actually, the pandemic showed us that almost everyone should get in progress to the e-commerce. So the municipality of Be'er Sheva, along with the NES and other companies, create this website, this online mall, and they actually offering the small and medium businesses all around the city to join this, with subsidized over the municipality. They can create, if you are a small business and you would like to join, they will create for you an online website. You have to go through this portal, and then you will get to different businesses. They will help you with taking the money, with the commission, with everything that you need. And this is actually an online mall just for Be'er Sheva businesses. Moving on. No, get back to the slides. Beverly. Do we have the slides?
I think we're wrapping up now.
I think that might have been the last slide that we have. Odelia, do you have any last remarks?
That was the last slide.
Oh, I had one more. Okay, but no, just this is one of the, what you saw right now is a few of the projects that we funded the last COVID grant, and that's it. If you have any questions.
Thank you. I want to personally thank Michal, Danielle, Alex, and Odelia for their participation today. That was a lot of information that was provided to you, and I think it's just a showing of how much we are doing overseas around the world, and the impact that your dollars are having on all of these programs. And I want to thank each of our presenters. It is now my pleasure to call on Kim Hirsch, who is going to wrap us up today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to all the wonderful speakers. This was the last in our series of webinars by the JCF Center for Strategic Philanthropy. I can only tell you that I have been with the JCF for 15 years, and I have learned in every single one of these seminars, including today, so much wonderful and helpful and inspiring information about what we do locally and around the world. So thank you for that. And thank you to everybody for being a part of this. And I just want to apologize to our to our participants about some of the technical difficulties today, but this was our first international seminar, so I'm sure everybody understands that's not always so easy. The Jewish Community Foundation is honored to be part of such an incredibly philanthropic community. Since the beginning of the crisis, more than 3 million in grants has gone out from our JCF to help with the crisis locally in Israel and around the world. We're very proud of that. This webinar, this series was brought to you by the Center for Strategic Philanthropy. Our three-part mission is to engage, innovate, educate, and innovate. And today was part of our engagement and education portion of what we do. And we're very delighted we have members of our Innovations Council on all these webinars. So thank you, everybody. All of these webinars are online, so you'll get it. If you've missed it or you think someone else would benefit from hearing this, you will get an email, and every webinar has been recorded and folks can watch it afterwards. Thank you all for joining us.